here today. But anyway, besides all that, Zach has an amazing testimony, and he really has been through a lot, and it's really exciting to see Zach and how he is today. And I'm just going to let you take over, Zach. And if you want to tell them a little bit about yourself and just go from there.
Okay. Um, well, let me see a little bit about me. Um, Husband, father of a really awesome 2-year-old girl, Sophia. She's fantastic. Shout out to Casey, my wife, and my daughter Sophie. And I'm also, yeah, let me think. I think I'm a chief estimator at Western Peak Plumbing and HVAC. That's my official job title. So that's what I do as my 9 to 5 right now. Um, I'm really into like writing and music and getting a lot into that. So that's something else I really like to do. Um, and yeah, I mean, above everything, I would say um, my relationship with God I would say, is what matters to me more than anything else. And been pressing into that with him and watching him develop that. Seeing what he's been doing with that has been really amazing. Um, I mean, it's funny because we're talking about a testimony, my testimony, and I asked God actually before I got on this call. I'm like, what is the word? What does that even mean? Like, I grew up in church. I grew up around all of like I guess you could say like Christianese, you know, and like the church terminology for this, that, the other thing. I also spent most of my life not knowing what any of it meant. But I knew what words were supposed to go where in conversation when you're talking to people. So I knew like, I would always talk about it that way. But just really, yeah, I mean, my testimony, my really just the story of my relationship with God and what He's done in my life, who He's been in my life. Um, it's really incredible. Um, I mean, like I was just saying, like I um, grew up in church, grew up hearing all this stuff, um, and I walked away from it for a little bit due to some stuff. Um, and then it was while I was on that path that, like, I guess you could say the prodigal path, the prodigal son,
Yeah.
and um, I was really far down that path, and I was actually having a moment um, of it was really intense. I was really heavily grappling um, with trauma and spiritual, like demonic stuff, and I was getting sucked in, really, I would say, to darkness. And part of me was reveling in it, and the other, like I would say, that was like um, my dead self was really reveling in that, and I was giving that part of me so much power and strength in my life, without even, I didn't really realize that at the time.
Yeah,
Um,
has it always been that way, or was there a specific period of time when you just noticed that the struggle was really getting deep?
I would say it's hard to say because like the part of the church that I grew up in would had a lot of I mean I would call it occultic practices it was involved in. So I think there was always a level of involvement that I had with that stuff that I didn't even see, for most of my life. And it was only after really pressing into my relationship with God, who God really is, with
Yeah.
God and who He really is, that like all that stuff that I had been involved in, the people around me had been involved in, started to, the light was shining on it and exposing it.
Yeah.
Um, So I will say that there were definitely times where it was more, um, I don't know, trying to think of the word. there were times where I was actively pursuing darkness. I think that's how I'd put it. Um, where like I knew like some of the things I was doing were wrong, were evil, and I was enjoying that. Um, so, and I mean like part of that would, I mean like sexual promiscuity, like stuff like that, like I knew that I was rebelling against God,
Yeah.
and I was enjoying that then.
Sort of
Um,
like half foot in and half foot out, kind of a lukewarm kind of a.
and then yeah, well that was I would that was really like kind of my mainstay for many years, was really the lukewarm um adherence to religion more so than
Yeah.
relationship with God. Yeah. I mean, my commitment to religion was not lukewarm. I'm a very all or nothing type of person, like no matter what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Um, so even if I'm part way committed to something, it's really, I'm almost not there at all. But with religion, um, I was very committed to that. Because for me, I've always believed in there is a right and holy way to live. I've always believed that. I've always held that belief. Um, that was the thing though, that one of the main choices before me, and was often presented as the only choice, um, was religion. Um, and the way I would define that was just like, what the way I see it is there's relationship with God, and then what religion does is it tries to replace that relationship with God with a relationship with something that looks like Him. Um,
Like
and so,
washing your hands over and over and over again. It's
yeah,
a.
yep, stuff like that. And, I mean, really, my goal for many years, for myself, was really, I wanted to use God to get where I wanted to be in life. And
Yeah.
that's what I did. That's what I practiced. Um, and that's what opened the door to a lot of, what I would consider occultic practices, and occultic really just living, is trying to use God and His word, like the words that, like the Bible and stuff like that, to get myself ahead in life, whatever my definition of ahead was at that time.
Yeah.
And when that didn't serve my purpose anymore, I told, I remember this very vividly. I was walking home from work and I looked up at the sky and I told God that I'd rather burn in hell than serve Him. If because I didn't like where I was at in my life, but
Thank
I
God it doesn't answer our requests all the
yeah,
time.
yeah, right. Oh yeah, no, I thank him. I thank him a lot for that one, man. 'Cause I was that kid, man. I was straight up, and I mean, like, it wasn't just with those words. I was living my life that way. I mean, that was a little bit after I'd gone to a religious college, and I dropped out, and I was back at home living with my parents, and I had started working, and I wasn't working where I wanted to work. I wasn't doing what I wanted to do. I wasn't experiencing what I wanted to experience, and I decided that was all God's fault. I and So I cursed Him for it, but really just the way I was living my life, the way I was thinking and everything. I was so set against Him. The whole, like in so many ways for many years before that. And that was really, that's when I started like actively pressing in, like, I'm just going to do the most rebellious things I can think of, all the while claiming I don't believe in God, like stuff like,
Yeah.
that's the thing. I started really stepping into this place. And I think what was happening was I was stepping into a place of disillusionment with the religion that I had been raised in, because it didn't work, and I mean, like, it had me so confused about, what the real priorities in life are, like what real priorities are in life and stuff like that. Um, but really it was like I had been worshiping religion, and when that stopped, quote unquote, working, it never did, but when it didn't feel like it was working for me anymore, I decided, whatever, I'm done with this. And that was when I cursed God, or who I thought
Yeah.
was God. And then I started going after, like, okay, what are all the things that the rules always said I couldn't do? You know, because I'm grown now, like
Yeah.
that was when I started moving, like, back and forth between living with my parents and other family members and friends. um I actually went through, um s- well, yeah, that was when I started that, and I started really pursuing, and, like, what are, like, whatever I think is the worst, the most, the most, it wasn't even so much always like what's the most evil thing I can do, so much as it's like I want to do whatever feels great, because I was just in so
Yeah.
much pain. But a lot of what I was going after was sex, drugs, alcohol, stuff like that. And it
Yeah.
wasn't anything like, I mean, like, for me, the way I grew up, it was nuts to even be considering that type of thing. Um, but
Now it's sort of nowadays it's sort of like, anything is really anything. Your truth is not necessarily the other person's truth, but as long as you believe that, right,
mhm.
it's
No, yeah, and actually I started to really press into those kind of mindsets and those kind of beliefs.
yeah.
Um, So it was basically like, for me, it was like, okay, I've grown up in this. This is the way to live. This is the only way to live, and everyone else's way is crap. It's wrong. So, um, if I then choose instead to believe that everything is okay, and that, yeah, I started pressing into that. Um, and there was, like, there's a lot of confusion happening in my life at that time. So, I was really just, I was looking for answers. I was trying to make sense of everything, because my master plan and my parents' master plan didn't work out. I was supposed to, I don't know, I think at that time I was trying to be a diplomat, you know.
Okay.
So that was my goal, was to be I think it was like I was trying to be like a Christian, like a very specific kind of Christian, and be a diplomat, and really just, I mean, I think the term for it is fundamentalist, I think.
Apologist, I
I'm
think,
sorry.
apologist or something like that. Christian apologist. Am
I
I?
mean, I guess to a level, yeah. I mean, I definitely was very much into, like, I'm gonna argue with people's minds. Like, I'm
Yeah.
gonna I'm gonna mentally argue with people and convince them that God's real and he's right and I'm right and you're wrong, and
Yeah.
once you agree that I'm right, we're good, and we're all on the same page and we can keep moving forward. And that was kind of like the basis of what I was trying to do. Um, but really, and this is just, if there's anyone that's gonna listen or is listening to this podcast, that's living in that. I mean, like, it's total garbage. It really is. And there's a better way. Like, there's that way is not the way of God, to beat people mentally or any other kind of way into believing,
Yeah.
the reality of God, and being experiencing Him, and the relation. That's not relationship with God, man. That was where I was at, was this relationship with religion. Um, and I was good. Like, I was good at it. I had lots of people that I would argue into a corner and try to, like, convince, like, work on convincing them. Of course, then when I met people that didn't just submit to that, and go with that. And I mean, really, it's just extremely narcissistic,
Yeah.
the kind of mindset to operate with. Um, when people didn't go with that, I would label them as an enemy of me and an enemy of God, because that was what I was taught to do. And that's what I believed I should do. Um, so that all happened, and that was even leading up to, this just really ramped up. This was very intense for me in high school, that I was investing and that I was living that way and operating with that mindset. And then it was supposed to culminate in me going to, like, a top-notch school, where I would get an impeccable education that would set me up perfectly for the perfect job, the perfect job that would have, like, power and money and all that kind of stuff with it.
So what kind of job were you looking for at the time?
Well, this was when I was thinking I was going to be a diplomat.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
I see.
yeah. So that was I was really into politics, and I wanted to really, and I don't think I saw it quite this way at the time, but really my objective was I wanted to run the world for God. Like I wanted to do that. I wanted to be a part of of, of other Christians, who I saw as Christians doing that type of thing, and so I thought being a diplomat was the way to do that.
Hmm.
Um, and
Yeah,
I'll go ahead.
yeah. It really works for Christian to Christian, but when it comes to like outsiders and stuff like that outside of the body, it doesn't necessarily work too well. I mean,
Yeah.
I've tried it and stuff like that, and
I hear that. Yeah, no, it was yeah, it was intense. And I would say even, you know, Christian to Christian, because this is where like the way I grew up was so, and the way I was raised and the way I was taught and the way I was intending to live out my entire life was so fear-based, was so control-based.
yeah,
Things that are opposite of anything to do with God. Things that are opposite of how he operates, how his kingdom operates, and that's what I was pressing into. And it's not, and I'm definitely not saying that like Christians shouldn't be involved in politics or anything like that. I believe the opposite. Like I really think it's important for kingdom people to be operating in every sphere of life, and
yeah,
just but here the thing is when the focus comes becomes on man. And I mean that's part of what religion will do, is it puts all the onus on a man or a woman and what they do. um then I mean the whole thing just, it's just another religion at that point.
yeah,
It's no different than any other philosophical structure or anything like that people live by in the world, um and I've seen that cause a lot of damage in my own personal life, but just the lives of people around me, where like so many people that I grew up with that like were in church, even even the pastor's kid at the church I grew up in, he doesn't acknowledge God like as God. And I think, I mean like I'm not gonna say like, oh, that's his dad's fault, or any, like it's all his dad's fault and stuff like that. He's a man, he can make his own choices. Um, and shout out to him, he knows who he is. um, but the way I was raised and the way that so many people around me were raised, and even just like the adults, the people that were raising us, I could see it in them. I could see like their lives devoid of everything that they were preaching about, everything that they would talk about, everything that um they would say is, like this is life, this is truth, but they're talking about the love and joy of God while they walk around miserable all the
yeah,
time, you know um and they're abusing each other, they're abusing their kids. I was a victim of that, like before experiencing the redemption of God, I was. And um so like I've seen how even when it's like Christian to Christian, I've seen how that, like any kind of partnership with religion, tears apart the body. um it's separate, it pits children against their parents, parents against their children. It just pits individuals against each other, and most of all it pits them against God, because it puts this it really it puts an image that looks like him in his place.
that's interesting because I've been also reading a book or listening to an audiobook anyway, and it's called A Church Called Tov. And anyway, it's a really good book, and
What is that? Sorry, could you say that again? What was it called?
A Church Called Tov. And
Okay.
I
All
guess since I've like saying it right now, I might as well say the author of it. Anyway, it's Scott McKnight. But
right. Okay.
anyway, he talks about the church, and he talks about many denominations, but he also talks about how there's a narcissistic type thing that's just entered the church, and he gives signs and things like that on what to look out for and stuff like that, and he shows what a culture, because tov is supposed to mean love in Hebrew, uh,
Okay.
or one of the many words tied into tov. But and he just talks about it, and he talks about what makes a loving culture and what makes more of a narcissistic culture. And you're pretty much talking about the same kind of a thing, so that's interesting.
Okay. That's cool. I'll have to
Yeah,
check that out, man. That sounds, yeah. So yeah, I mean, basically, well, like, I mean, like you're saying, that narcissistic culture, I grew up in that, and I perpetuated it really. And I saw it, it was after it was after leaving that, and that was where, like that was kind of what happened for me was, I was on this path. Um, and I mean, dude, like I didn't even want to go to school, really. I told
yeah,
myself I did because it was what was expected of me. Um, but I didn't even really want to. And then I went and I was there a couple of months before dropping out. I just couldn't handle it.
yeah.
Um, and a lot of that had to do with how I was raised. Partially, like um, the way
Very
I,
structured,
so
like it.
structured, so sheltered. Like you're taught to think a very specific way,
Yeah,
and when you encounter other thought processes, basically you're taught you have to replace those thought processes with the one you have, because
yeah,
that's the one you were taught by your parents, because they had that, they passed it on to you, and you're supposed to pass it on to other people. And that was I started encountering people who thought differently than me,
yeah,
and where, up until that point, my parents had sort of an ability, and the group of people I was with had a sort of an ability to control how I perceived everything and how the people around me perceived everything. Because I was homeschooled, and then even I think I tried I went out to middle school for like 2 weeks or something, and
yeah,
I had the same issue happen. Um, I think it was that was a Catholic school I went to for a little bit. And when I was starting to come up against issues there, and the way that it was dealt with was I was pulled out of that and put back into the very extremely controlled environment. You know, I
yeah,
feel like it's one of those things where it's like the Catholic school was pretty controlling too, but like it wasn't the level that I was, uh, you know, growing up in. And
yeah,
then I did that, and then I went into high school, and it was really just more of the same. Um, and then all the way up to like where um, everything is so, like you were saying, like so structured, um, in order to keep everyone thinking a certain way and living and believing a certain way and living a certain way. And that all culminated when I went to the college I went to was the same denomination of the church I'd grown up in. So that was like an in, to
yeah,
that school. All my pastor had to write a letter or something, and I got scholarship money based on that, like stuff like that. Like I got, it's like, oh, you're part of our denomination. You get this taken off and this and that. And I went, and this school, this college was so it was very intense for me in a lot of ways. For one, it's still be, like meeting other people that, yeah, I mean, this school has a way it wants everyone to think. But some of these other, there are other people there that don't think that way, that are going there and being there, and I was connecting with those people. Um, but seeing in a more real world setting the way I was raised being put on display the way it was,
yeah.
and its failures, and it's really just its emptiness.
So it's sort of like a striving mentality. It's like, to get to the top, kind
Yep.
of.
Yeah. Really it is living for God in your own strength, living your own life in your own strength. It was so centered on, and part of it too is it's so centered on everyone, like all the believers being sinners.
Yeah.
And this is something, man, I mean, like, this gets me heated whenever I see, like,
It's
whenever
like
I
I
see
gotta beat myself with rods and sticks over and over and over again.
to please God, to
Yeah.
please God, so that in hopes, in hopes that He doesn't strike me down and send me to hell, because He could, and you never really know. Because I mean, the part of the way I was raised too was there's some people that are predestined to go to hell.
Yeah.
And I mean, really, I mean, once you start thinking like that, well, you never know who's supposed to go and who's not, really, at
Yeah.
the end of it. Because part of it too, like you're saying with the whole, like, you got to beat yourself. That's the thing, is you have to beat yourself down enough
Hmm.
so that you're not being prideful before God, because pride comes before a fall, and the fall's going to take you, the fall goes all the way to hell. So, like,
Yeah.
don't do that. But that's the thing where, like I was saying before, where it was so fear based and so control based.
More like cookie cutting of the scripture, so to speak.
Well, there's that too. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, you're taking the they're taking pieces of scripture. The people that that are involved in this, and like I said, I did this too. They're taking pieces of scripture, building a whole. They're building theology out of that, and then they're glorifying that theology above God.
Yeah.
And they're glorifying words that God has spoken above him. And that's another thing, that, like, in my experience with religion, that it'll do is it'll take the words of God and twist them. So you'll be believing the word, you'll be reading the word, you'll think you're doing everything right, but really I mean, like, the reality of it was, this was the modern day it was modern day Pharisee type stuff.
Yeah.
Like, that's really what it was. Um and I started to witness, some of the I started to witness that actually being at this school. I mean, for one, this school cost a crazy amount of money, right? But where I lived, like the building I lived in, right? Um, the I just remember it being like, for all the money that it cost, all of that was and this was something I was learning, was all of that was going up to the administration, where, like, things that were actually concerning the students and stuff like that,
Hmm.
um, were totally neglected. Like, I had, like, a hole in the wall in my shower, and, like, plants growing in it.
Oh wow.
This school costs, like, I can't remember how many tens of thousands of dollars a year. Like, it was really intense, and that was just like a little instance. I feel like that's like a silly thing, but there were things. There were a lot of
Somebody plant the plants in there, like
no,
like put potting soil in the holes or something like that.
right? Maybe that's what happened. But, I mean, we're dealing with, like, and I mean, these were just like some of, like, the living condition type things, where, I mean, like,
Yeah.
even as I'm saying it, I'm like, wow, man, that was something really ridiculous to complain about.
It is
But
bad though.
for all the money that we're paying, the school is on top of a mountain.
Yeah.
Um, the school's called Covenant College, by the way, for anyone that's wondering. So, like, it's I don't know how things are now, so I'm not gonna tell anyone, like, it's, don't check it out or anything. This was my experience at this place.
Yeah.
Um, so it's on top of a mountain, and there's no transportation, like public transportation or anything like that, up or down. The school doesn't provide that. So, like, basically, if you like me, I didn't have any kind of, so I was just stuck up there.
Yeah.
um, and there was some pretty intense stuff that had happened right before I got there. Um, and So when I was struggling with some stuff, and I went to get help for it, it was very hard for them to deal with that. But that, I don't think that was their fault. Um, but I mean, that was part of it. But sorry, I'm starting to get off track here. I'm realizing, going back to, like, some of the stuff where this these like we were talking about the striving mentality, this place
Yeah.
this place operated on. I was seeing. I mean, I was at a point where that wasn't working for me anymore. I could not continue on in my own strength. Um, and so I ended up leaving because of that. Like I just had a total like mental breakdown. Couldn't handle it. Couldn't go with it. Um, and I left, and I moved back in with my parents. And to me, I'm 17 years old at this point, and I'm thinking, my God, my life is over, because that's how I had failed. I dropped out of school, I mean, and the way I was taught and believed about everything was like, so basically what happened is my master plan fell apart,
Yeah.
and I didn't know what to do with that. And so that this was around the time where I totally, like, I lost what I would say, what little what sense I had at that point. I just threw it to the wind, and I was like, whatever, I'm just gonna do whatever I want to do that feels good. Whatever
Yeah.
I think feels good, I'm going to do that to get away um, from this pain that I'm in, because the way I'm looking at it and the way I'm able to see my life is over. And by no measure was it over. I mean, like,
Yeah.
I would, I was, I grew up privileged. I went back. I had a place to go after dropping out of school. I went home and living in this, my going back home and start living again in this opulence. And I didn't even have to get like to work or anything like that. Like, the level of privilege I was in was just was astronomical. But again, going back to like the striving mentality, because I had failed at the plan that I believed God had for my life, which really was my plan. I believed that in my being, my identity, I was a failure. Um, and that my life was over, when really I'm looking at it realistically. I'm 17 years old. I have immense resources to do whatever I want to do next, you know. But that striving mentality of you're not good unless you do X, Y, or Z, that was prevalent and prevailing in me. And so it was driving my perspective. Um, it was really like the center of my perspective now was I'm a failure. Um, because I had nothing left to offer from, like, as far as I could tell, this thing that I thought was God. Um, I had tried to go all the way to get into this position of power to run the world for God, and it didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So that was when I was like, well, fine, whatever. I don't care about God anymore. I'm just gonna do whatever feels good. And um,
So how did that go?
it's terrible. You might have heard that before, but
Yeah.
it tends. I would say it goes that way. I mean, like, doing whatever, and just touching on this real quick. That was doing. It was really a continuation, I would say, just in a different way of doing what felt good. Because before, doing what was right, I say quote. I put heavy emphasis in the quotations on that, because
Yeah.
but like, that hadn't worked. Following all the rules hadn't worked. So now I'm going to break all the rules I feel like breaking and see if that works. Because that was what I was searching. I was really heavily partnered and living with this orphan spirit and this orphan mindset. Um, and at this point, I believe that God hates me for having failed him. So, okay, well, God, you hate me, I hate you, and I'm not going to listen to anything you have to say. So, you asked how it went. It went terribly. That was when I started getting into all the just making stupid choices to make them, and seeing how
Yeah.
far I could take that. And then I was going in that really, really heavily for a few years, and then um, got to a point where, trying to think, huh. Yeah, well, I mean, it got to a point where I couldn't sustain it anymore. I was completely miserable. Um, and I tried to end my life. Um,
Okay.
and that was, that was where I was at with it, was like, well, like, and I mean, at this point, at that point, I had taken I had taken following the rules as far as I could, taken breaking the rules as far as I could. Um, so I was like, well, there's nothing left to do, because with this, like, that's that religion mindset, life is all about rules. And if you follow,
Yeah.
you'll succeed, and if you don't, you fail. So from my perspective, I've completely failed at doing both of these things. So this is it. And I was just so consumed by this misery and this self-hatred that
Hmm.
I was done. I could not continue doing that anymore and justifying being alive. Um, so I tried to take my life, and in the middle,
Yeah.
and I'm saying, like, literally in the middle of this, God intervened and saved me from and stopped what I was doing before it could go any further, and spoke identity into me, and like he just spoke a claim over me that nothing could
Can I ask
contest.
how it happened?
Yeah,
Or I mean, if you're trying to like steer away from too much
no,
detail,
that's
but
okay. I'm comfortable. I'm comfortable talking about it.
okay.
So um, it's interesting because to me this is still so fresh, because this happened like 4 years ago, just about almost exactly at this point. Um, so I had come home from work, and um, at this point I was working a full-time job. I had a full-time course load at school.
Okay.
Um, I had and I've got all the people in my life I'm trying to have relations, like, different kinds of relationships with, and I've got basically, just to sum it up, I had way too much going on. But this was that doing mentality, where I have to do in order
Yeah.
to be valuable. So I'm doing as much as I can cram into 24 hours a day, really trying to do more than that, trying to make time. And I came home, and my apartment was dark. All my roommates were gone. There was no one there, right? It was just me, um, coming in there. And I remember, um, I just felt like that day, this relationship I'd had with this one girl had ended very badly. Um, and I was completely, like, I was having a complete mental breakdown about this. Having that, really just breaking down about everything, and didn't quite, I was trying to, like, ignore that, and just cope in a bunch of different ways. But I came in, the apartment was dark, and something in me just snapped. And it was
Yeah.
like I was just like beholding this abyss, you know, looking at my life and seeing this abyss, and just like, man, this is, and it was like a fluid motion where I was thinking these thoughts, and I was taking off my belt at the same time, thinking, okay, I'm gonna get undressed now, and, like, I'm gonna change out of my work clothes and put on comfy stuff. And it went from I'm changing out of my work clothes into comfy stuff to I'm gonna strangle myself with this belt in a matter of like a
Yeah.
3 seconds. Like, it was just a fluid motion of this happening. And so I started doing that. And I remember going to my bathroom and watching myself do this in the mirror. And I felt like I was like I'm looking at myself in the face, and I'm like, part of me is astonished that I'm doing this, because from my perspective, I had never gone that far. And with any, I'd had tons of thoughts and stuff like that before, about hurting myself, killing myself, hurting other people, like stuff like that. I'd never done anything, but now I'm watching myself actually do it. And so I'm like, I'm freaked out, but
Yeah.
it's still going on. And I remember, and I just was doing this, and I started walking around my apartment as I'm doing this, trying to convince myself to stop. And all of a sudden, and it just got worse. And all of a sudden, I had this, I heard a voice in my head. And it was so loud in me. It was like the clearest thing I'd ever heard inside of me. And it was so loud to me, it was almost audible. And I heard the voice like in this, it was like a very angry, bellowing tone that came out. And
Yeah.
and this voice said the words, "Not my son." And I have no idea what's going on. I'm totally freaked out.
Yeah.
This is freaking me out. But I hear these words, and then I see this picture in my mind. Um, and it's of this, like, it's like this extremely strong and powerful, like, forearm and hand and everything. And it's like bright white. Like there's like this light that's emanating from it. It's like this very intense bright white light coming from this hand, and this hand reaches out and grabs this like black, misty, ethereal type thing by
Yeah.
its throat and drags it across a room that I didn't, it drags it across this room and throws it, and it's kicking and screaming, and this thing just doesn't let go of I mean, now I see it's a demon. The hand does not let go of this other thing, and it drags it across this room and throws it out this set of doors.
Yeah.
And then, so all of that happened extremely quickly. And then, as soon as this thing was thrown out those doors, all of the strength and desire to do what I was doing completely left my body.
Yeah.
And I just fell on the floor in a heap and just started sobbing. And I had no, what's up?
I said that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, yes, it was. No, it was. And I didn't know, at the time. And I mean, looking back on it, like now, I'm like, oh my God, that was God. Like that was
Mhm.
God literally saving my life from a demon, um, from me and this demon. And like at that time though, I'm just like, what the, like what just happened? Like I'm
Yeah.
sitting there, I'm sobbing, crying my eyes out. I'm like, I don't know, like I did not expect any of what just happened to happen. Now it's happened, and I'm totally freaked out. And that could be God, but I don't actually know for sure, because I was still, I was just still so broken, but in that moment, it was like when I heard the words, "Not my son," um, I and
Gave you
I
a
sorry, go ahead.
it gave you sort of like a revelation.
Oh yeah, I mean this spoke all the way down to my spirit that had been bound and wrapped up and just been living and operating in so much bondage. Um, and it's hard not to get I'm like, I feel really emotional right now talking about this because
Yeah.
for so for all the years that I had spent in church, never had I considered myself a child, like really actually believed in the reality of the fact that I was a child of God. I
Yeah.
mean, I claimed Jesus as my friend when I was 6 years old. I vividly remember that. And there's a lot of things from that time period of my life I don't remember, but I specifically remember asking Jesus to live inside of me,
Yeah.
and that I wanted to be friends with him forever. So for all, and it was like those words, just those three words that just tore through all of this, um, all of the garbage and lies that I had believed. It was like this arrow just went straight through all of that stuff, right right to my deepest self. And it was like a truth bomb that just went off in there and just let me know, like, God's like, it was God let, and this is, I just totally believe this. God was letting me know, you're my son, you've been my son, and
Hmm.
I'm not going to let this thing take the life of my son. I'm not going to allow that.
So good when we.
Sorry, what was that?
I said it's so good when we hear that stuff.
Oh my gosh, dude. It really, really is, man. I mean, like for for me, the way, having been raised the way I was raised and still believing at this point. I mean, at this point, I was very much like I had writings, at that point that I was communicating with God and cursing him and this, that, the other thing. And here he is, like like not caring about any of that. Not caring, like like I told you the time that, like I was saying, the time that I said like I'd rather burn in hell than serve you, and I'm literally there about to go do it, and he's just like, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Like, you're my kid. When he says I'll never leave you nor forsake you, he means that. Like, nothing, when it says that nothing can separate you from the love of God, no power, no principality, no height nor depth, none of that stuff. I mean, here's this demon trying to literally kill me, take my life from me with my own hands. And God grabs this thing by the throat and throws it out, like, no way. No way is that happening. Not
Yeah.
not when the blood of my son Yeshua has already spoken for this one.
Yeah.
Like, this one belongs to me. And so, I mean, like you said, I mean, it's amazing to hear those things, and I didn't know how amazing it was at the time.
Yeah.
I'm over here like, this is the freakiest thing, that's like one of the freakiest things that's ever happened to me. Like, very much an encounter with, because another thing too, the way I'd specifically been raised, I mean, I had heard about the spiritual realm, but the way it was taught about was very parsed and strange, and really it was
Yeah.
more believed that like that kind of stuff doesn't happen, at least not here in this country, in this place.
Yeah.
And
I was taught that way too.
yeah, okay, so yeah, so I'm like, here it is, and I'm like, I had other experiences in my life I could point to and be like, I know it's real, I've
Yeah.
experienced. Here's another thing, because that was the other thing too. The only experiences that I could remember spiritually up to that point, the things that had been spiritual were encounters with evil,
Yeah.
with demons and stuff like that.
So
Uh,
you've experienced stuff like that all through your life, kind of sort of like tormenting kind of the things is what you're saying.
yeah, yeah. I
Okay.
mean, like in various ways. Most of the time, it wasn't like, at least from what I can remember, it wasn't as physically tangible.
Yeah.
But for me, the last time, and this at this point, I think when this happened, when I had this experience, I think I was 21. And the last time that I could remember having what I considered like, a spiritual experience was when I was 10.
Yeah.
And I felt like I was in a room at someone's house, um, as a relative. And in this room, it was a shrine dedicated to dead family members, and they would talk to them in this room. You know, I mean, knowing what I know now, we're dealing with familiar spirits, man.
Yeah.
And they're convening with them, and so this person, I was in the room putting some away, and this person they came in, they put some away, and they left, and they closed the door.
So is
And
it like saint worship or was it worship of family members
I
kind
don't
of a
I
thing?
don't know if it was like worship. It was just like they would talk to them, like
Oh, okay.
they would just convene with.
Yeah, they would have pictures and stuff
Mhm.
like
Yeah,
that set up, and then they
yeah,
would talk to them.
yeah.
Okay.
So, and at that when this happened, this experience that I had, I was 10 when I
Yeah.
had this experience. So I went in this room, I was putting stuff away. My relative, they came in, they put some stuff away, and they left, and they closed the door. And I felt things touching me, like my
Yeah.
physical body, and I heard things in my physical, like I actually heard like things talking to me, telling
Like
me that,
yeah, it's like you sort of heard voices, but they weren't really there, kind of a thing.
oh no, this was like someone else was in the room talking to me.
Okay.
Yeah, like
Okay.
this was like a very tangible type, like I could feel these things as though they were people walking
Yeah, I
around.
got goosebumps all over.
Yeah, it was brutal, man, and they were telling me they were telling me stuff like, you'll never be able to leave, like that,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff will have you forever. And like, so I'm 10 years old, I'm like, what the crap? Like I'm out of here, man. Like this is terrifying. But like that's that's another thing is like looking back on it, and this is something that religion will do, is it disempowers children and it strips away the reality of who they are and their
And they're
rights. Because I mean, dude, if you were a child in the kingdom of God, doesn't matter how old or young you are, you have the Holy Spirit inside you, and you can bind demons and command them to leave in Jesus' name. Like I feel hot right now. Like I'm starting to feel hot because I mean, like the way I was raised was so part of that fear was like, demons were real, but there was nothing you could do about them.
and all the horror movies that are out there that you just watch when you're a kid. You just assume that that's
Yep.
just
And
the way
that,
it is.
yeah. And I mean, things, you know, the way the spiritual and the natural interact, and the way that the spiritual comes through things in the natural, especially through media and stuff like that. I mean, like that was, I had experienced that in a number of different ways, but now,
Yeah,
I mean, like, and God, I'd had night terrors for years and all this kind of stuff, and really it's just this constant demonic torment that was happening in one form or another. And I did not know that I could say in Jesus' name, I command this to stop, and I
yeah,
bind this thing and I command it to leave. But like it really is, it's that simple.
yeah. It is.
When you have that power inside of you, it doesn't have to be. I mean, like a child, especially like that. This is what I've seen this with my daughter. A child that knows they are connected to God and they know that's who they come from and that's who they have relationship with. He'll tell them he'll tell them independently of any adult, and like what they should say in the moment and stuff like that. And it's not like I think you should teach your kids as part of training them up in the way they should go. But part of that is teaching them that they have this power inside of them, that they have the power of God inside of them, that they have authority over the spiritual realm. Um, so, fast forward to 21, I watch God exhibit that authority
Yeah,
when I'm in the process of taking my own life, and he immediately puts a stop to that. Um, and this happened a little bit, and the whole like suicide attempt, and then God saving me. That happened, So I had been 10 when that one thing happened, and then fast forward 11 years, I have this happen where I try to take my life, and God saves me and casts out this devil from my life. And um, so it was around that time, a little bit after I had met um, so many of the people that, I mean, I value so much as brothers and sisters now. I mean, my wife, I met Casey a little bit before that happened. Um, I had been Caleb, which is Caleb Moten, shout out to Caleb. um,
you know who you
he,
are.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You know who you are, Caleb. So he was my roommate. He was one of my roommates. It was a very interesting setup. It was myself, it was Caleb, and the my friend Mark. Um, he was the pastor's kid at the church I grew up in.
Yeah,
Um, and then um, this guy Jonathan, um, and all really great dudes, fantastic people, and I love them. So Caleb, a little bit before this, had started. He'd wanted to start a Bible study at our apartment, and for all of my talk about God not being real, I was the most vehemently opposed to this thing, and I was real, and I did not. I'm sure that my roommates knew, and I'm gonna, I apologize to them now on air how terribly selfish I was. I was a terrible roommate. um, but Caleb wanted to do this Bible study, and the way we had things set up in the apartment was we voted on things. The other, Caleb wanted to do this thing. I hated the thought of it. And for me, it was Caleb wanted to have some people over on Sunday afternoon for an hour or two just to talk about God. Well, to me, there was no worse idea on the planet. For one, God, why are you trying to do that? Like we can have our philosophical discussions about that here, but like you're trying to like bring a ton of people who think exactly like, because again, I'm thinking religion.
Yeah.
You all think exactly the same. Y'all are crazy. I tried y'all's church. Like, y'all are nuts. um, so, and that was the thing, was at this time I was, starting to get to, I was talking to people I knew that were believers, and I was doing that thing where now I'm on the other side. I'm playing devil's advocate, and I'm trying to show them that what they believe is garbage.
Yeah.
And I'm over here thinking I'm doing everyone a favor. So I'm vehemently opposed to this whole Bible study idea. And the other two guys did not care. They were just like, whatever, that's cool. You can do that. So I tried to convince them. I tried to like do like some, political type finessing, like, okay, I'm gonna get you all to vote with me against this thing.
Yeah.
It didn't work. And thank God it didn't work. Um, because the go ahead is given, and Caleb starts bringing all these people over on Sunday afternoons. They're coming over from church. Some of them aren't even from church. I'm like, who are these people? Why are you all in my apartment? I want to watch TV in my living room. You know, my entitled self. I had one in my room, but that wasn't good enough. I had to watch the big one.
Yeah.
So, um, at first, I just tried ignoring it. Very quickly that didn't work, because while Caleb, his initial proposal, had been like somewhere around like an hour and a half or something like that. These people start hanging out at my apartment for like 3-4 hours at a time.
Yeah.
Um, and so,
Holy
basically what's up?
A Holy Ghost party.
Oh, it
Right.
was totally a Holy Ghost party, man. And I'm over here not, I'm not knowing this. So, he's having these people over there over for 3-4 hours. They're starting to be over for 3-4 hours at a time very quickly. And it went from like, I can't remember, like 10 people to like 20, 25 sometimes, just like that. I mean, like, it was so quick. So
Yeah.
we're also to the point now where we don't really have much room left to move the apartment whatsoever. So there's really no way to like avoid this if you're there. Um, and that just, that made me more upset. It bothered me even more. So at one point I decided, okay, and then I think there was a day where they were talking about miracles, and I was trying to hide in my room, and like, I can't remember what I was trying to do, but I was trying to hide in my room and the door is shut, but I can hear them because they're all hype about God and his power and the way he's displaying it. So I'm hearing all of this come through the door still, and I'm like, well, I can't get away from this entirely, because that at this point too, it went from first the hour and a half to 2 hours to 3 to 4 hours. Now it's turning into 5, 6, 7, 8. I mean, like, these people are just at my apartment all day long,
Yeah.
up into the night. So I'm like, well, this is really, I wake up, they're they're here. I leave, they're here. Come back, they're here. So I'm gonna try to I'm gonna go do what I've been doing with all my other religious crazy friends and go try to convince them why they're wrong.